out in English before we move on is, verse 18, the house of Jacob shall be fire. If any of you, want to like go blow the minds of your kids or grandkids or nieces or nephews, I'm pretty sure, and Mac would know this better than I am, that calling something fire is like very much in these days. Like if you see, one of your friends and you like their shirt, you can tell them that shirt is fire. So if you really want to, go blow some millennial's mind, let them know that goes all the way back to the times of Ovadia. And who knows, maybe we'll make the Old Testament cool again. So that's just a little random note and a joke. But yeah, let's revisit both the story of Dinah and the appearance, or at least the mention of this kind of mysterious nursemaid, handmaid named Devorah, and how both of these women play into our text this morning. The story of the abduction and rape of Dinah is unsettling and disturbing, as we've already talked about. And I'm not just referring to the abhorrent actions of Shem, but also of Dinah's treatment by the text. Dinah is notable for being named as Jacob's daughter as part of the greater Jacob narrative, but she really isn't distinguished in any other notable way. In fact, in contrast to her 12 brothers, we are not even told why she receives the name Dinah. What is the significance to her mother or her family? And as we read throughout the story in this morning's Parsha, she's referred to as Leah's daughter, she's referred to as Jacob's daughter, she's Shimon and Levi's sister. She never quite seems to get her own identity. And seemingly, in her attempt to go out and find herself, to go visit the daughters of the land, which is how this morning's passage starts, tragedy strikes. And so what we perhaps know most famously about Dinah is that she never says a word. There's another famously mysterious female character mentioned in this morning's reading. In chapter 35, verse 8, we read, Vatamot Devorah meineket Rivka vatikaver mitachat leveit el tachat ha'elon vayikra shmo Alon Bachut. Devorah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Beit El, so it was called Alon Bachut, which literally means the oak of tears. This passage is striking for a number of reasons, some of which you have all begun to point out this morning. The text rarely introduces by name characters who aren't core to the narrative. It is even more exceedingly rare when one of these characters is a woman. In fact, compare this with the verse in Genesis 24:59, where Devorah is introduced. Vayishalchu et Rivka achotam ve'et menikta ve'et Eved Avraham ve'et anashav. So they sent off their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men. When Rebekah is initially leaving her parents' house, she brings this nurse, who we assume is Devorah, along. But even when they set out on their journey together, Devorah is not mentioned by name. She's just left as an anonymous nurse. And it's just really weird that we're giving no context for this woman's life or her death, or why the occasion of her death brings so much sadness or causes so much sadness. And even ultimately, what was she doing with Jacob's camp in the first place, if she was Rebekah's handmaid or nursemaid? And what is perhaps the strangest part of this entire story is that what we refer to as kind of the classical sources and the classical commentators and the midrashim and the medieval rabbis, they don't really seem to care. And they really don't have very much to say about this. which for a group of men who, writes books about a misplaced letter, to come upon a whole verse like this that just seems so mysterious and get almost nothing, it certainly boggles my mind a little bit. You would think that this passage would open their eyes, inspire them to write something, that a tradition would be handed down about this woman. But really, we get almost nothing. The most widely accepted midrashic explanation is that her death is kind of tied to Rebecca's death. As Sharon pointed out, we really don't hear very much about Rebecca's death, certainly not in the moment. We'll get it a couple chapters later, kind of again mentioned in passing. And the reason they interpret it that Rebecca's death this way is that Rebecca kind of dies a little bit alone and under a cloud of shame, right? Like she dies when Jacob is on the road. Esau hates her for, being part of tricking him out of his birthright. And Isaac is old and blind and feeble. And so she kind of dies with a little bit of anonymity, but the text still wants to honor her. So they honor her by mentioning the death of her handmaid. And I would say that at best, it's a stretch. I can't tell if you're all rolling your eyes or not, but I wouldn't blame you if you were. And like I said, there really isn't a lot in the more kind of classical sources about this. So instead, I'm going to turn us to modern commentary. And I'm going to draw from this book, which maybe you can see up in my screen, even if the letters are backwards. It's called The 5 Books of Miriam, a woman's commentary on the Torah. And it's written by Dr. Ellen Frankel. And what she does in this book is she kind of very cohesively combines text and midrash and folktales and her own writing to relate the experience of the Torah from the perspective of the women in Tanakh. And so here she's writing from Rebecca's voice that Devorah's death is not only noted, but even commemorated with a living memorial, shows just how beloved she was to our family. Her service spanned 80 years, the 20 years of my barrenness, the 40 years when both of my twins were at home, and the 20 long years of Jacob's exile. With her death, we all had plenty of reason to mourn. I think this interpretation serves as a gentle reminder that if we want to be able to relate to the patriarchs and matriarchs as human beings and relate to their humanity, we can't look past the human experience, the myriads of supporting actors who flit around in the background, dutifully and loyally fulfilling their own destinies. Not every hero in the Torah needs to have wrestled with God or lived in great strife. But sometimes the actual model for a life well lived can be found in the passing mention of a background character, or in the death of someone like Devorah. Which brings me back to the story of Dinah. I would argue, and I think we've already kind of begun to discuss this amongst ourselves this morning, that it is incumbent upon us as readers and studiers and hopefully lovers of Torah to work to go back and fill in the gaps that we see, the gaps that we find in the text. To remember that Dinah spoke, that she was named Dinah for a reason, that she wasn't just a daughter or a sister, but a woman and a person in her own right, with a story all her own. Judaism, unfortunately, has thousands of years of patriarchal history for us to deal with. And we can't totally rewrite that. And I also don't think we're ready to kind of toss all of that history and that knowledge aside. But what we can do, and what we can do as individuals, and what we can do as a community, is work to find ourselves in the text and see and develop the characters and people who were unseen, and to really figure out where we can find the representation, where we can find the people who speak more to us. And maybe sometimes that's going to come in Devorah, who we know nothing about, rather than Jacob or Leah or Rachel or Bilhah or Zilpah. Also characters that we probably at the end of the day don't know nothing about. And one other kind of note, and I think as you all know at this point, I like when I can to tie in baseball references especially. I think that just speaks to my upbringing. But recently, for any of you who've been following this, the Florida Marlins, or the Miami Marlins, I don't even know which one they are these days, they hired the first female general manager in really the history of all major American sports. Her name is Elaine Ning, I think. And one of the podcasts I was listening to about this basically said that baseball and sports in general needs to be ready to kind of deal with a doubling of their talent pool, right? There's 50% of the population that has been shut out of management, of general management, of decision-making, of idea generation. And that pool has always been wider, and we're just finally starting to realize how much more there is to call upon. And I think that's true for us in our Jewish studies too. I think we've made great strides with incorporating the voices of women, incorporating the voices and ideas of groups that aren't classically listened to or heard. But really, we are able to kind of expand our knowledge base so much with all that Judaism is known for, writing books and having expansive libraries and generating ideas. That's really, for the last thousands of years, been only half of what's out there. And I hope that we are ready to kind of open our minds and open our eyes to that expansiveness that is available to us in the 21st century. I had a moment last week where I realized that we had 2 women who were over 90 on our Zoom call. And that made me think, doing a little bit of kind of quick mental math. And as I look at the screen right now and I see, all our smiling faces and all our smiling boxes, just between us right now, we have collectively probably close to, if not over 1,000 years of knowledge and life experience and community building, and going back to struggling and wrestling with text, with ideas, with Judaism, with Jewish history to call on. And so, continuing to move that forward and continuing to make sure we're incorporating new voices and learning about new characters and filling in the gaps that when we read them, we realize, holy cow, why has nobody said this? Why has nobody noticed this before? I hope that's something we're really able to call on each other and to call on those centuries worth of history that are just with us every Shabbos morning to really continue moving these questions forward.